May 15, 1943. Somewhere west of Kansas, 20-year-old Luftwaffe private Vera Hartmann pressed his face against the train window. He had been traveling for 3 days since departing Camp Shanks in New York. 3 days observing America unfold before his eyes. 3 days attempting to grasp the sights he was witnessing. The train decelerated at another parched station, Amarillo, Texas. On the platform, a man clad in leather chaps and a broad-brimmed hat observed the approaching train. A genuine cowboy, not a figure from a propaganda poster, not a performer from Hollywood, but an actual American rancher rolling a cigarette, his eyes narrowed against the relentless desert sun. Hartmann and 499 other German prisoners of war were on the cusp of entering a reality that Joseph Goebbels had adamantly insisted did not exist. They were primarily soldiers of the Afrika Korps, captured at Kasserine Pass, Tunis, and Sicily. Men who had served under Rommel. Men who had anticipated meeting their demise in the desert. A different desert, a different conclusion. The Nazi propaganda apparatus had meticulously detailed what they should anticipate from American captivity: barbarism, torture. The uncivilized mongrels of the New World would treat them as mere animals. After all, Americans were characterized as soft, decadent cowboys and gangsters, a nation of mixed ancestry devoid of culture or honor. The initial shock had occurred during the sea voyage. White bread, genuine coffee, 3 hot meals daily, more sustenance than German soldiers had seen in months. The very same rations provided to American soldiers as mandated by the Geneva Convention. Now, as the train conveyed them deeper into Texas, the paradoxes continued to mount. Through the windows, they observed endless stretches of farmland, vast herds of cattle that extended to the distant horizon, oil derricks relentlessly pumping black gold, towns illuminated by electric lights, paved roadways, and automobiles everywhere. One prisoner would later pen a letter to his family, stating, "The Americans possess so much of everything that they even share it with their adversaries." Camp Hearn, Texas, located 30 miles northwest of Houston, was constructed to accommodate 4,800 prisoners. The reality was a small American town transplanted into the heart of cotton country. The buses from the train station proceeded through the main entrance. The Germans anticipated machine gun turrets, attack dogs, and brutal guards. Instead, they discovered barracks equipped with electricity and indoor plumbing, hot showers, and flush toilets, amenities many of them had lacked even in Germany. The camp commander addressed them through an interpreter. The directives were straightforward: work 8 hours each day, adhere to regulations, cause no disturbances. In return, they would receive 3 substantial meals daily, a wage of 80 cents per day in camp script, access to the canteen, recreational opportunities, and correspondence from home. Private Friedrich Becke struggled to comprehend what he was hearing. Wages! They were going to compensate prisoners at the same rate as American privates, who earned $50 per month. The following morning, they met their work supervisors, not soldiers, but ranchers, cotton farmers, and cattlemen, men attired in worn denim and leather boots, men in need of laborers for the harvest. The American agricultural system was sustaining half of the free world, yet American youths were engaged in combat in Italy and preparing for the invasion of France. The Texas cotton fields stretched for thousands of acres. Without adequate labor, the crop would perish in the fields. The German prisoners represented the answer to every farmer's fervent prayer. A rancher named John Davidson surveyed the group of prisoners. He required 40 men for his cotton fields. He gestured toward the largest and strongest of the Germans. Then he performed an action that utterly stunned everyone. He walked over, extended his hand, and introduced himself. In Texas, he explained through the interpreter, men shook hands before commencing work together. Oberleutnant Wilhelm Miller stared at the outstretched hand. 6 months prior, he had been engaged in combat against Americans in Tunisia. Now, one of them wished to grasp his hand as an equal. He accepted it. Davidson's grip was firm, calloused, the hand of a working man. The cotton fields of Brazos County unfurled for miles under the Texas sun. The labor was arduous, bent backs, bleeding fingers, and sacks weighing 100 pounds. Yet, something extraordinary unfolded in those fields. The German prisoners labored alongside Mexican migrant workers, black sharecroppers, and impoverished white tenant farmers. The racial hierarchy that the Nazis had so fervently promoted began to dissolve beneath the Texas sun. Everyone perspired equally. Everyone's back ached in the same manner. Everyone drank from the same water bucket. At midday, Rosa Martinez, the ranch cook, rang the dinner bell. The prisoners expected mere bread and water. Instead, they were served beef stew, cornbread, sweet tea, and apple pie. Rosa spoke no German and the prisoners spoke no Spanish, yet she ladled generous portions onto their plates and offered a warm smile. Food, it seemed, was a universal language. Vera Hartman would forever cherish the memory of that meal, not for the food itself, but because a Mexican woman extended the same kindness to the German prisoners as she did to everyone else. The Third Reich had proclaimed such a scenario impossible. The Third Reich had been mistaken. On Saturday night at Camp Hearn, the recreation hall reverberated with music. Not the stern strains of military marches or fervent Nazi anthems, but the lively sounds of Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys on the radio. Western swing, the characteristic music of America in 1943. Following Italy's defection in September 1943, Italian prisoners of war were granted increased liberties, including the ability to attend local dances, albeit under chaperoned and supervised conditions. German prisoners observed this with evident longing. Some camps subsequently permitted carefully regulated social gatherings, always under supervision and control, yet still offering a semblance of normalcy during wartime. The prisoners formed musical ensembles, learned American songs, and some even composed new ones, creating a peculiar fusion of German folk melodies and Western swing music, a genre unique to their experience. The letters home generated their own crisis. What could they possibly write? How could they convey their experiences to families enduring Allied bombings, to mothers standing in ration lines, to wives who had not seen meat in months? Friedrich Becker wrote to his wife in Hamburg, "The Americans are not as we were told. They have provided us with warm clothing and good boots. We eat meat daily. I am saving my wages. When I return home, we will have money." He omitted any mention of the pervasive abundance surrounding him, the automobiles owned by nearly every farmer, the electric lights that burned throughout the night, the stores overflowing with merchandise. How could he? She would likely never believe him. The censors, moreover, would not permit such details to pass. At Camp McClan near Amarillo, the Cowboys were not metaphorical figures. They were real men, and they required assistance with thousands of head of cattle. The rancher, Thomas Anderson, assessed his new laborers, Luftwaffe pilots, panzer crews, U-boat sailors. Not a single one had ever seen a cow up close. He sighed. This promised to be an interesting undertaking. He commenced with the fundamental lessons: how to approach a horse, how to hold a rope, and crucially, how to avoid being kicked, bitten, or trampled. The Germans were apprehensive of the animals, and the animals were suspicious of the Germans. It was mutual distrust at first sight. However, Anderson demonstrated patience. His own son was piloting B-70s over Germany. These young men before him were also someone's sons. Enemy or not, they were here. And cattle, as it turned out, were unconcerned with politics. Within weeks, something remarkable occurred. The Germans took to ranching as if they had been born to it. Perhaps it was their military discipline, or their engineering minds appreciating the logistics of herding cattle. Or perhaps it was simply that working with animals offered an honesty that war had never possessed. Hermann Erich Schmidt became Anderson's most skilled horseman, adept at roping, branding, and doctoring cattle with the best of them. At night, he sketched the surrounding landscape. Mesas bathed in sunset, longhorns silhouetted against the sky, cowboys and Germans working in unison, images that would have been unthinkable anywhere else in the world. In 1943, on Sunday mornings within the camps, German prisoners conducted their own religious services. Lutheran ministers and Catholic priests among the POWs led the worship. The American military provided chapels, religious materials, and guaranteed freedom of religion, even for the enemy. Some camps even arranged special permissions for prisoners to attend local churches on holidays. During Christmas 1944, a handful of German POWs sat in the back pews of an American church. The hymn was Silent Night, originally sung in German. They knew every word. By the third verse, tears streamed down some of their faces, not from sadness, but from the profound shock of being treated as human beings on enemy soil. On December 23, 1944, at Camp Papago Park, Arizona, 25 U-boat sailors had been diligently digging for 3 months. Their tunnel had extended 178 feet beyond the perimeter fence. Tonight, they would escape. Their plan was as brilliant as it was foolish. Float down the Salt River to Mexico, live freely until Germany emerged victorious from the war. They had constructed a collapsible boat, studied maps, and meticulously saved provisions. Everything was in readiness. Captain Littman Hanser Cross led the way. They emerged into the Arizona desert under a full moon. Freedom beckoned. They ran toward the river only to halt abruptly. The Salt River was completely dry, bone dry. Not a single drop of water, only sand and rocks. Their maps were from 1880, predating the construction of dams and irrigation systems. Their boat was rendered useless, their plan utterly defunct. They dispersed into the desert. Within hours, they were hopelessly lost. The Arizona desert in December became frigid at night and scorchingly hot during the day. They possessed no water, no substantial food, and no discernible idea of their location. Private Johann Kramer, disoriented, stumbled into a gas station near Phoenix. He had been at liberty for 3 days, suffering from sunburn, dehydration, and hallucinations. The attendant, an elderly gentleman named Pete, provided him with water, prepared him a sandwich, and then contacted the authorities. While awaiting their arrival, Pete shared his coffee and spoke of his own son serving in the Pacific. 2 father-sons, one lost in the desert, the other lost in a war. Captain Jürgen Buttenberg managed to travel the furthest, reaching downtown Phoenix. He was seated on Van Buren Street on January 28 when a street cleaner noticed his accent. The police found him exhausted, homesick, and ready to surrender. Even in escape, America remained America, abundant, comfortable, and remarkably difficult to resent. In the spring of 1945, as the war in Europe drew to a close, the mood within the camps shifted palpably. Letters from home ceased arriving. Cities lay in ruins. Families were scattered or deceased. What awaited them upon their return? Thomas Anderson extended an offer to his German ranch hands. He expressed his wish that they could remain and work on his ranch, stating he would gladly sponsor them if permissible. The remuneration would be substantial, $100 per month plus room and board, a sum exceeding what they might earn in Germany, assuming Germany still existed. However, the Geneva Convention was unequivocal. Prisoners were to be repatriated without exception. They were mandated to return home. But home to what? Soviet occupation, devastated landscapes, and widespread starvation. Ranchers throughout Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona penned urgent letters to their congressmen. These were no longer merely prisoners. They had become neighbors, friends, and the most exceptional workers they had ever employed. Yet the law was the law. On May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day, Germany surrendered. At Camp Hearn, the prisoners listened to the radio in somber silence. Their country was gone. The Third Reich, prophesied to endure for a millennium, had lasted a mere 12 years. Everything they had fought for had turned to ash. But something else had been born within these camps, on these ranches, and in these churches. Understanding, friendship, a future far removed from anyone's initial imagination. That evening, John Davidson brought a bottle of whiskey to the camp, fine pre-war bourbon. He shared it with Wilhelm Miller and the Germans who had toiled in his fields. They drank to the cessation of hostilities, to the fallen on all sides, and to whatever lay ahead. Miller, through an interpreter who was no longer required, conveyed his desire to return when and if the opportunity arose. America had demonstrated to him something that Germany never had, that strength did not necessitate cruelty, that power did not demand hatred, and that enemies could indeed become friends over cotton fields and cattle drives. The repatriation commenced in 1946. Trains retraced their eastbound journey to the ports. Ships set sail for Europe, returning to a devastated nation. But the Germans carried something invaluable with them. Knowledge, not military secrets, but something far more potent. They understood American agricultural practices, their organizational methods, and their work ethic. They had witnessed American abundance and comprehended that it was not a mystical phenomenon, but the product of methods, machinery, and management. Elements that could be learned, replicated, and adapted. More importantly, they knew Americans, not the caricatures depicted in propaganda. They knew real Americans. Thomas Anderson teaching them to ride, Rosa Martinez ladling extra stew, John Davidson shaking their hands, Pete offering water to an escaped prisoner. When they recounted these experiences in Germany, no one believed them. Americans treating prisoners with greater consideration than Germany treated its own soldiers? Impossible. Paying them wages, imparting skills, sharing their places of worship? Pure fantasy. Yet, the evidence was overwhelming. 425,000 German POWs labored on American farms from 1943 to 1946. They harvested millions of dollars worth of crops, picked cotton by the ton, and saved entire harvests that would have otherwise rotted. The American agricultural miracle, which sustained the Allied war effort, was made possible, in part, by German prisoners. By 1950, something remarkable occurred. Immigration laws were amended. Former prisoners became eligible to return. 5,000 boarded ships in Hamburg and Bremen, not as captives this time, but as immigrants, seeking the very America they had discovered during their captivity. A former Afrika Korps sergeant returned to Texas in 1951. John Davidson awaited him at the station. The handshake was the same, though the grip was stronger. No translator was needed now. His English was flawless, tinged with a Texan accent, making him sound like a true cowboy. He married a local woman, established a machine shop, and specialized in repairing tractors and farm equipment. His son would attend Texas A&M to study agriculture, and his grandson would serve in the United States Army's 82nd Airborne Division in Afghanistan. The transformation was complete. Another former prisoner returned to Arizona. Thomas Anderson had work waiting for him, the finest horseman he had ever trained. Eventually, this man acquired his own ranch, 500 acres near Tucson, where he raised quarter horses and won accolades at state fairs. His neighbors were aware of his history, but remained indifferent. In Arizona, individuals are judged by their work ethic, not their origins. Even one of the Papago Park escapees returned legally, opening a small business in Phoenix, not far from where he had been apprehended. The irony was not lost on anyone. Decades later, former POWs returned to visit the camps, bringing photo albums filled with images of young men in Wehrmacht uniforms, learning to pick cotton, mastering the art of roping cattle, and discovering that their adversaries were, in fact, human beings. At one reunion, an elderly rancher stood to address the assembly. His voice had weakened with age, but his message was clear. You boys came here as enemies. You left as friends. You came back as family. That's the American way. That's the cowboy way. That's the human way. The applause continued for 5 minutes. Former enemies embraced, and not a dry eye remained in the room. The statistics presented one narrative: 425,000 German POWs, 700 camps across 46 states, millions of dollars in agricultural labor, and 5,000 eventually returning as immigrants. However, the true story lay not within the numbers, but in the profound transformations. Nazi soldiers becoming Texas cowboys, enemies evolving into neighbors, hatred dissolving under the warmth of hospitality, and propaganda shattered by simple human kindness. The Germans had anticipated American barbarism. Instead, they found American abundance. Not merely material wealth, but an abundance of spirit. The confidence of a nation so secure in itself that it could afford generosity towards its enemies, so strong that it could extend mercy. In his final letter from Camp McLean, one prisoner of war wrote to his mother, "The Americans are cowboys, just as Goebbels proclaimed. But he never informed us that cowboys could be kind. He never told us they would share their food, their skills, their humanity. He never mentioned they would teach us to ride horses and repair tractors. He never explained they would shake our hands. He never told us any part of the truth. The truth was simpler and more profound than any propaganda." In the American West, German prisoners of war discovered something that transcended nationality, ideology, and war itself. They learned that enemies are merely strangers with whom one has not yet worked. They realized that hatred cannot survive a harvest, and that humanity is ultimately stronger than any uniform. They arrived as warriors of the Third Reich. They departed as cowboys. And in the dust of the Texas cotton fields, the shadowed mesas of New Mexico, and beneath the desert sun of Arizona, they absorbed the most perilous lesson imaginable for a totalitarian ideology. They learned that their enemies were human, and in turn, so were they.